Now let's go on and look at motor control, for example. Earlier we talked about the motor control on the setup. You can put in the motor data information. For example, you can put in the manufacturer, you can put in the full load amps, the voltages, the motor horsepower, and your service factor. At this screen also, there's a number of other items that you can program in. For example, you can program in if your starter control is across the line, if it's a Y delta type of starter that you're trying to control. And when we mean Y delta, we actually mean the internal Y delta that's inside of a control panel. If you have an external Y delta control or some type of reduced voltage starting method that's external of the main control panel, you basically would choose ATL or across the line for that situation, because those are treated just as across the line starters. Now, also we can do breaker control, which basically says that you have the capability of opening or basically firing off a signal to your close coil, which will then close the breaker, and then also whenever upon stopping the compressor or loss of power, it'll trigger an output that will close the or fire off the trip breaker. So it will actually close the breaker or it will trip the breaker, and that's found with this breaker control here. And if you'll notice, you can do this. That's all easily done through the faceplate. Additionally, one of the last features I want to talk about on the motor setup screen is our excessive motor start lockout. Now, there is another screen that gives you the amount of allowable motor starts. And basically what we do is we base our number of starts that we ship this from on 3, which is the recommended NEMA MG1 standard. So in other words, you get a cold start and then 2 additional hot starts within an hour. After that, then the machine will shut down. If you shut down or trip the machine, I should say, then you set off a timer, and after 4 hours, all of those starts or 2 of those starts will return if you've had 2 motor starts. Now, one thing to note on our control, we don't log motor starts if we do not see motor amps. So therefore, you don't burn a start count if there are no motor amps or there's no inrush into the motor. So, but you can set this up, your excessive lockout, to either be a lockout, basically saying I only allow so many starts and then I lock the motor out, or you can set it up to be an alarm only. And what it ends up doing there, it will log any number of starts that go beyond the limits. And that's found over on this screen here on our info. If you'll notice, we have motor starts, and then we have motor starts limit, which tells us that we've went over 32 times. Now, that seems excessive, but remember, this is just a demo. So anyway, let's go back to our setup screen again. We want to talk about the PID setups just briefly. We will have an additional video at a later date that's going to talk about tuning the PID loops and doing a lot more work in that area, and try to get a demonstration set up to kind of show you how to go about tuning that for different situations that you're going to find your machine in. But anyway, during setup, you can tune the PID loops here. We ship these systems from the factory with a very standard set of values that typically have worked for us in the past on other machines during startup, but that does not mean that they will work for you. You will need to customize some of those settings to speed up the valve control or maybe slow it down to make it smoother and transition better for your machines. Anyway, we will be talking about that at a later time. Timers and counters, very interesting screen here, and we've covered this before in other videos, but we have a starting timer, a coast down timer, and a waiting timer. And what these timers do for you, this starting timer, there's a number of things tied to that. And one of those is the operation of the aux oil pump. So if you have an aux oil pump on your machine that allows the machine to come up, and then you have a mechanical main pump or maybe an electrical main pump that comes in to run the machine, we will shut that aux pump off after 20 seconds, and then your machine will be running on its full pressure pump or the main pump at that time. Now, we also tie our alarm and trip multipliers to that, and there are also some bypasses on the digital inputs that are kind of tied to that value as well. So basically, we fire off a 2x multiplier, for example, with your vibration. So in the setup for your vibration input, you would want to say, hey, I want a 2 times multiplier. In that situation, during the start of the machine, you will have 20 seconds by which the alarm and trip limits are doubled on that compressor, and that's tied to that. The coast down timer prevents your machine from being restarted during a coast down phase because you don't want an out of bus or out of phase bus transfer that'll end up damaging the motor. So we set this up so that we'll lock the machine out from starting during the coast down phase. And also we have a waiting timer, and what that is tied to is the power up event. So when we power the machine up, we don't want to be able to fire it off and start it instantly, because there are situations where maybe you lost power momentarily, power came right back on, the machine's still spinning, somebody goes up and hits the start button and you damage the motor and the coupling or potentially the compressor at the same time. So we have a waiting timer. So on power up events, we will wait anywhere from 60 to 240 seconds typically. We have counters over here, for example, the surge event counter. And basically surge event says I'm allowed 6 surges in this example inside of 10 minutes. And what that allows me to do is unload, reload the machine up on a surge. Now, upon the 6th surge, I will unload the machine because obviously there is a problem that could be occurring with the machine, and we want to make sure that we look at it and we service that situation, or at least give an examination of what's going on causing the surges. And also the main motor start attempts. This is what we talked about, where we have it tied together with the number of starts that are allowed before you get an alarm or a lockout of the machine, and that is found on this screen. If you'll notice during our example, all of a sudden our password entry screen went from a operator 3 back to this orange password not entered, press here to enter tag. What happens after 10 minutes of non-use, you reset the timer and your display goes back into lockup mode. So in other words, if you happen to be programming and you walk away and you're worried about somebody else having access to the control after you left, if that doesn't happen within 10 minutes, this will go back and lock itself back out and keep other non-authorized users out after that 10-minute period. Okay, and then we want to go over here to surge control. We'll also do a later video of how to set up the surge control for the machine. And these things are more operational. The PID settings and the surge control are more operational than they are as far as just initial setup. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail, give you a little more information about how that is all set and how they interrelate. Oil system, we have a number of oil system startup inputs. Auxiliary oil pump, you can choose whether or not the machine has that. If you've got a feedback input that goes into the PLC. We can also choose air-driven aux oil pumps, emergency oil pressure, oil heater protection, a post-lube timer, and we can also set up a time delay for that post-lube timer.